My husband honored his mistress at our anniversary, then I revealed I own the company they work for. I hope you enjoy this story. My name is Colette Brennan. I'm 44 years old, and for the last 22 years I've been an accountant. Numbers are my life. They are clean. They are honest. They always add up. The clinking started on the far side of the ballroom. A knife against a champagne flute. The sound spread in waves, silencing the murmur of 83 guests until the only noise left was the soft jazz from the quartet in the corner. I watched my husband Derek take the microphone. He was comfortable up there, a salesman selling the story of himself. His hair was freshly cut. The top two buttons of his shirt were undone just so. He smiled that easy practiced smile, and the room smiled back. My fingers were warm around the stem of my own untouched champagne flute. I'd been holding it for 40 minutes. 15 years, Derek began, his voice smooth through the speakers. 15 years ago, I married the most organized woman in Illinois. Polite laughter rippled across the white tablecloths. Organized. Not kind. Not beautiful. Organized. The woman who paid the bills on time and remembered his mother's birthday and booked this very ballroom for our anniversary party. But tonight, he continued, his eyes scanning the crowd. I want to raise a glass to someone who truly understands me. My grip tightened on the flute. I knew what was coming. I'd been rehearsing this exact moment in my head for 8 months. Derek turned. Not to me. He turned toward table 6. To Trish Dolan, he said, his voice ringing with sincerity. The best regional sales manager this company has ever seen. And the person who makes every Monday morning worth showing up for. The applause was immediate, genuine. People stood up. Trish, with her blonde highlights and her wrap dress, pressed a hand to her chest in a perfect performance of surprise. Her lips mouthed, "Oh, stop," but her eyes drank in the attention. 83 people clapping for the woman my husband was sleeping with. My back was straight against the chair. My jaw unclenched, a deliberate, disciplined release of pressure. They all expected me to cry, to make a scene. They had no idea. 62 of the people in this room worked for Hargrove Logistics. Not a single one of them knew that 6 weeks ago, through a quiet family trust, I had become their boss. I owned 62% of the company that signed their paychecks. And on Monday morning, every person who stood for that toast would get an email from Colette R., Brennan majority stakeholder. But not tonight. Tonight, I let him have his moment. Because the thing about being an accountant is you don't rush the audit. You let the numbers tell the story. And Derek's numbers were about to come due. I raised my glass, just a millimeter, the smallest toast in the world. I took a sip and set it down. It all started 8 months ago with a single charge on our shared visa. The kitchen clock read 9:47. It was a Tuesday. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the faint sound of Taylor Swift singing from my daughter Lily's room upstairs. I did this every Tuesday night. Reconciled our credit card statements. It wasn't a chore. It was a ritual. Numbers are controllable. Numbers don't lie. Numbers don't say working late when they mean something else. Then I saw it. $340. Rosario's on Halstead in Chicago. Tuesday, October 3rd. Derek had told me he had a client dinner with Frank and some guys from the warehouse. I knew for a fact Frank brought egg salad in Tupperware to work every single day. Frank did not eat at restaurants that charged $340 for a meal. I didn't panic. I didn't call him. My hands were steady as I opened a new browser tab and searched for the restaurant. Rosario's on Halstead. Italian. Intimate. Photos showed candlelit booths for 2. Perfect for special occasions. Derek hated Italian food. Pasta's just wet bread. Cold, he'd said 100 times. My fingers scrolled back through the statements. September, $287 at a cocktail bar called Violet Hour. Team building, he'd said. $195 at the Untitled Supper Club. Networking, $412 at the Chicago Athletic Association Hotel. A hotel. I clicked the date. Thursday, September 14th. I checked my own calendar. Lily's parent-teacher conference. I had gone alone because Derek had a regional meeting in Schaumburg. Schaumburg is a suburb 30 miles west. The Chicago Athletic Association is downtown. The body knows before the mind accepts. My hands went still on the keyboard. I realized I hadn't taken a breath in 5 seconds. I inhaled slowly the way I did before presenting quarterly earnings to the board. I pulled up 3 more months of statements. The pattern emerged like a trend line on a graph. Dinners, drinks, the occasional hotel. All on nights, Derek said he was working late. I did what an accountant does. I opened a new spreadsheet. Date. Venue. Amount. Derek stated reason. Actual evidence. By 10:32, I had 4 months of data. Upstairs, Lily's music stopped. I heard the soft padding of her feet to the bathroom, the flush of the toilet, the door closing again. She was 11. Last year, she'd asked me why Daddy didn't talk to me at dinner anymore. I'd lied. I told her he was just tired. My own mother had told me the same thing about my father. He's just tired, Cole. He wasn't tired. He was already gone. I was sitting in the same kind of kitchen looking at the same kind of lie. But my mother stayed. She washed the dishes and didn't cry and didn't fight. She just absorbed it for 26 years until he passed away, and all she said was, "Well, at least that's over. I am not my mother." I closed the laptop. I didn't delete the spreadsheet. I washed my coffee mug and set it in the rack to dry. In the quiet darkness of my own kitchen, I made a decision. I wouldn't confront him. I wouldn't forgive him. I wouldn't leave. Not yet. I would do what I do best. I would audit my husband. The spreadsheet didn't feel like enough. Numbers were evidence, but they weren't confirmation. They were the smoke, not the fire. For 3 weeks, I collected data. I cross-referenced Derek's calendar with our credit card charges, and the discrepancies were everywhere. A golf outing with Kevin, with no charge at the golf course, but an $89 bar tab at a bistro downtown. A warehouse inspection in Rockford with a gas station receipt from a town in the complete opposite direction. The worst was the flowers. $75 at a boutique florist in the city. Derek had never bought me flowers. Not for our anniversary, not for my birthday, not even when Lily was born. One night at dinner, with Lily upstairs doing her homework, he mentioned he might have to go to the Rockford site again that Friday. I didn't look up from my chicken. Need the company card or personal? He hesitated for just half a second. Company. Obviously. Obviously, I said, cutting a piece of chicken with precision. I'll make a note in the books. He didn't even lie well. He just lied often, and for 15 years I had been too busy balancing his world to check his math. That Thursday, I told him I was working late to close out the quarterly numbers. Then I got in my car. I didn't drive to the office. I drove to a parking garage across the street from Rosario's on Halsted. I sat in the dark and I watched. There they were. Derek and Trish in a corner booth by the window. I saw his hand cover hers on the table. I saw her laugh, her head tilted back. I saw him lean in the exact same way he used to lean in with me back when he was still trying. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. A text from Derek. Running late at the office. Don't wait up. Kiss bug for me. I looked at the text. I looked through the window at my husband, typing with one hand while the other one was still touching hers. My fingers felt like eyes as I typed back. Okay. Lily says good night. I put the phone down. I watched them for 11 more minutes. Then I drove home. The part of me that had been holding out hope, the small stupid part, finally went quiet. Now it was just math. The following Monday, I got a call from an attorney named Ray Schofield. He handled my grandmother's affairs. Nana Margot had passed away 2 years ago, and her trust had finally cleared probate. I was the sole beneficiary. I knew about the trust, but I didn't know the amount, $780,000, and I didn't know about the letter. I sat in his mahogany-paneled office, a place that smelled of old paper and furniture polish, and opened the envelope. Nana's loopy fountain pen script filled the page. Colette, if you're reading this, I'm dead, and you're probably managing everyone's feelings about it. Stop that. I left you this money because you're the only one in this family who won't waste it. But I have one condition. It's not in the legal document, so you can ignore it. But you won't, because you're my girl. Don't you dare stay for the wrong reasons. I did for 18 years. Your mother did for 26. Don't you be the third Petrie woman to love a man more than she loves herself. Use this money for something that makes you powerful. Not comfortable, powerful. All my love and most of my stubbornness, Nana Margot, I read it twice. My hand was shaking when I signed the receipt for the trust documents. I folded the letter and put it in the pocket of my blazer. 2 days later, I asked Wade Hargrove for a meeting. Wade was 71, the founder and sole owner of Hargrove Logistics. He'd mentioned retirement at the last quarterly meeting, a throwaway line about letting someone younger ruin the place. Everyone had laughed. I had gone home and researched the company's corporate structure. I sat across from his big oak desk, the one with the little motor trucks lined up on the shelf. I'd like this to be off the record, I said. Wade leaned back in his chair, his suspenders straining. That's the first. Sit down. I opened the folder I'd prepared. I know you've been fielding offers. Midwest Freight Capital, Apex Logistics Partners. His eyebrows went up. How did I reconcile your expense reports? I said. You went to 3 acquisition mixers in 6 months, but didn't sign anything. You don't want to sell to strangers. He stared at me for a long moment, then let out a short laugh. You know, Colette, you're the only person in this building who actually pays attention. I want to buy your majority stake, I said. The room went quiet. His pen stopped tapping on the desk. You, me, through a family trust. I have $780,000 in liquid capital and pre-approval for a loan to cover the remainder. I'm offering fair market value based on the last 3 years' earnings with a 3-year transition clause keeping you as advisory board chair. I slid the folder across his desk. It had color-coded tabs. Every page was numbered. He looked at the folder, then back at me. Your husband know about this, no? He nodded slowly. Good. Derek's a fine salesman, but he couldn't run a lemonade stand without someone handing him the lemons. Wade opened the folder. He looked at my valuation, my draft purchase agreement. He looked up at me again, his expression unreadable. Then he stuck out a calloused hand. Let's talk details, he said. We shook on it. His hand, which had built a company from a single truck into a fleet, and mine, which was about to sign the checks. Walking back to the parking lot, I felt a strange calm settle over me. Nana Margot hadn't left me money. She'd left me an arsenal. I sat in my car, the engine off my hands, resting on the steering wheel. I pulled out her letter and read the last line one more time. Use this money for something that makes you powerful. I put the letter in my glove compartment and started the car. I made 2 calls. The first was to Ray Schofield. Draw up the Brennan Petrie Trust. Beneficiary, Lily Rose Brennan. Trustee, Colette R. Brennan. The second was to the loan officer. I'd like to move forward. The acquisition had begun, and Derek would never see it coming. The world of acquisition is a world of paper. For 2 weeks, that world became my home. I wasn't just an accountant reconciling numbers anymore. I was becoming the numbers themselves, each signature on a loan application or a corporate restructuring document another cell in the vast spreadsheet of my new life. I sat across from Ray Schofield again in his office that always seemed to be overflowing with the stories of other people's lives stacked in beige folders. My own folder, the one for the Hargrove acquisition, sat on my lap. It was the only organized thing in the room. The trust was established by my grandmother years before my marriage. I explained, my voice as level as a ledger line. And it was funded by her estate after her passing. Under Illinois law, that makes it separate property. Derek's name doesn't appear on a single document because Derek has nothing to do with it. Schofield made a note on a yellow legal pad. And if he finds out, he won't, I said, and the certainty in my voice was absolute. He doesn't check the mail unless it looks like a gift basket. He doesn't read legal documents. He once signed a 3-year car lease without reading the mileage cap and ended up owing the dealership $4,200 in overage fees. I was the one who handled it. A small, weary smile touched Schofield's lips. He made another note. Your grandmother was right about you. Every document I signed felt like another brick in a wall Derek didn't even know was being built. A quiet, invisible wall of holding companies and beneficiary designations. By the time he finally saw it, it would be too high to climb. The hardest part was going home. I would leave Ray's office, my mind swimming with amortization schedules and liability clauses, and walk into a house where I had to pretend to be the same woman I'd been for 15 years. That Tuesday, the three of us were at the dinner table, a rare occasion. Derek was performing the part of the engaged father. "So, fifth grade," he said to Lily, forking a piece of meatloaf. "How's that going, Bug?" I watched Lily's face. A small, almost imperceptible flicker of disappointment. She pushed a green bean around her plate. "Dad, I'm in sixth grade." Right, sixth." "Of course," he said, already reaching for his phone as it buzzed on the table beside him. He glanced at the screen and quickly flipped it face down, but not before I saw the reflection in the dark window behind him. A single capital letter T followed by a tiny red heart emoji. "Work stuff," he said to no one in particular. "Frank's got the warehouse inventory all messed up again." I said. The overhead light in the kitchen felt too bright. It exposed everything. The small lines of exhaustion around Derek's eyes. The way he chewed with his mouth slightly open, a thing I'd never noticed until I started hating him. He didn't know his daughter's grade. He didn't know his wife was in the process of buying his company. He didn't know anything except Trish's schedule. Later, after I tucked Lily in, I came back downstairs to the quiet kitchen. I opened my laptop. The acquisition timeline glowed on the screen. The closing was just 4 weeks away. The next morning, I got to the office at 7. The third-floor copy room was the only place with a printer that handled legal-size paper, and I'd been using the early morning hours when the floor was deserted to print the stacks of documents Schofield needed. The room was warm, filled with the chemical smell of toner and the low hum of the machine. I was pulling the last warm pages from the output tray when the door swung open. Frank Upton stood there, a styrofoam cup of coffee in his hand. Frank was 58, the warehouse operations manager, a man who had worked for Wade Hargrove for 30 years. "Morning, Cole," he said, his voice cheerful. "You're here early." My hand instinctively closed over the top page. I could feel the raised letters through the paper. Hargrove Logistics proposed transfer of majority interest. I flipped the stack face down on the counter. "Quarterly close," I said, keeping my voice casual. "You know how it is." He nodded, taking a sip of his coffee. He didn't seem to notice the papers. "Wade's been in a weird mood lately." "You think he's actually selling this time?" My heart was beating a little too fast in my chest. "He mentions retirement every quarter, Frank." I wouldn't read too much into it. "Yeah, probably," he said. He leaned against the doorframe. "Derek says if Wade does sell, he's in line for VP. Says it's, what did he call it?" Basically confirmed. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. Derek told Frank he was getting a promotion, the same promotion he was no doubt promising Trish. I offered a non-committal smile. Derek says a lot of things. Frank laughed, a loud booming sound in the small room. "That he does." He saluted me with his coffee cup and walked out. I stood there for a full minute, the stack of warm papers in my hand, listening to the buzz of the fluorescent light above me. Derek was handing out promotions like party favors, with a company he didn't own, using authority he didn't have, in a building I was about to buy. The sheer breathtaking arrogance of it almost made me laugh. It was better than laughing. It was fuel. The sheer arrogance of Derek, handing out promotions like party favors, became the quiet engine that drove me through the next 5 weeks. I did not confront him. I did not change my expression when he came home late, smelling of a restaurant we could not afford on his base salary, carrying the stale air of a lie on his clothes. I simply woke up earlier, stayed up later, and worked the numbers. The acquisition of Hargrove Logistics happened in stages, a methodical dismantling of my old life and the construction of a new one. It required a level of focus that left me physically exhausted but mentally sharper than I had been in a decade. I was living a double life. By day, I was the quiet, efficient bookkeeper of the house on Elm Street, making sure the dry cleaning was picked up and the refrigerator was stocked. By night and in the stolen hours of my lunch breaks, I was a corporate raider, meticulously taking over my husband's employer. My first major hurdle was the bank. I needed an additional $480,000 to bridge the gap between my grandmother's trust and Wade Hargrove's asking price. I chose a mid-sized commercial bank in downtown Naperville, a place with heavy glass doors and a lobby that smelled faintly of lemon polish and old currency. I sat across from a loan officer named Sarah, a woman roughly my age with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense bob. I handed her the prospectus I had built. It was a masterpiece of financial modeling. I had projected out the next 5 years of Hargrove Logistics accounting for fleet depreciation, rising fuel costs, and anticipated warehouse expansion. I showed her the exact structure of the Brennan Petrie Trust, proving the capital was completely isolated from my marital assets. Sarah spent 20 minutes reading through the binder. She did not look at her phone. She did not interrupt me. When she finally looked up, she closed the cover and rested her hands on top of it. She told me the Small Business Administration loan approval process usually took weeks of back and forth, but my documentation was the most thorough she had seen all year. We locked in an interest rate of 6.2%, combined with the $780,000 from the trust I had, $1,260,000 in available liquid capital. Wade's company, based on the last 3 years of earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization, had a fair market value of $1,180,000. I offered him $1,200,000 flat. It was slightly over market value a premium to ensure he had absolutely no reason to pick up the phone and call the private equity firms in Denver or the acquisition brokers in Chicago. I wanted the door slammed shut behind me. Once the letter of intent was signed, the due diligence phase began. This was my territory. I had managed Wade's books for years, but looking at them as an employee is very different from looking at them as a prospective owner. I requested complete access to the raw data files, the unvarnished records, before they were polished for the quarterly board packets. Wade gave me the server keys without hesitation. I spent the second week of November sitting at my kitchen table long after Lily had gone to sleep. The house was dead quiet, save for the occasional settling of the floorboards and the hum of the refrigerator. The glow of the laptop illuminated the dark room as I dug into the departmental budgets. Hargrove Logistics was incredibly healthy on the operational side. Frank Upton ran the warehouse with a tight, disciplined grip. The truck maintenance schedules were optimized. The routing software was saving the company thousands in fuel every month. But when I opened the file for the sales department, the department Derek managed as the regional director, the numbers began to blur into a messy, fabricated fiction. I leaned closer to the screen, my eyes tracing the columns. It was not outright fraud. Derek was not smart enough for outright fraud. It was worse. It was pure lazy incompetence masked by aggressive accounting. The sales department had been padding their client retention numbers. If a client reduced their shipping volume by 80%, Derek's team still logged them as a fully retained active account, artificially inflating the success metrics. They were booking projected future sales as current pipeline guarantees, making the department look like a revenue engine when it was actually stalling out. I cross-referenced the padded accounts with the commission payouts. Trish Dolan's name appeared next to the worst offenders. She was hitting her quarterly bonuses based on accounts that were practically dead in the water. Derek was signing off on her performance reviews, approving her bonuses, and passing the inflated numbers up to Wade as proof of their stellar teamwork. A new kind of anger washed over me, cold and precise. It was one thing to cheat on your wife. It was another thing entirely to mismanage a balance sheet. Derek and Trish were not just betraying our marriage, they were actively harming the financial health of a company I was in the middle of purchasing. When the ownership changed hands and a new independent audit was conducted, this sloppy management would be dragged into the light. It was a massive liability. It was Derek's department, and very soon it would be Derek's problem. By the second week of December, the air in Illinois had turned bitter cold. The oak trees in our front yard were bare, their branches scraping against the gutters in the wind. I drove to Wade Hargrove's attorney's office to sign the final transfer papers. The conference room was fast-lined with law books that nobody ever read and dominated by a sprawling mahogany table. Wade sat at the far end, looking older than his 71 years, but somehow lighter as if a great physical weight was being lifted from his shoulders. Ray Schofield sat to my left, reviewing the final stack of documents. The signing took over an hour, page after page, signature after signature. Colette R. Brennan, trustee. Colette R. Brennan, majority stakeholder. The scratch of the expensive fountain pen was the only sound in the room. I felt a profound sense of isolation, sitting there building an empire while my husband was likely sitting in a booth at Rosario's holding another woman's hand. Wade pushed the final addendum across the table. His arthritic fingers lingered on the edge of the heavy paper. He looked at me, a wry smile pulling at the corner of his mouth. He told me something interesting had happened the previous month. He said Derek had come into his corner office, closed the door, and asked about equity. Derek had puffed out his chest and declared he wanted to buy in as a partner to take the company to the next level. I stopped writing. I looked at Wade, my pen, hovering over the signature line. With what money, I asked, my voice completely flat. Wade chuckled, a dry, raspy sound that echoed in the large room. He said that was exactly what he had asked Derek. I carefully signed my name on the final line. I set the pen down. Derek wanted to buy in, with money he did not have, into a company his wife was quietly purchasing out from under him. The staggering delusion of the man I had married was almost difficult to comprehend. He lived in a reality constructed entirely of his own ego, assuming the world would simply bend to accommodate his desires. He had no idea the ground he was standing on belonged to me. The transition was legally binding the moment Wade's signature joined mine, but the public announcement was scheduled to coincide with the new fiscal year. I had 4 weeks until the anniversary party, 4 weeks to maintain the illusion. I shook Wade's hand, thanked the attorneys, and walked out into the freezing wind, clutching the leather portfolio that contained my future. I returned to the office the following Monday, stepping back into my role as the quiet bookkeeper. The routine was my camouflage. I processed payroll. I balanced the petty cash. I smiled at the receptionist and made small talk about the impending snowstorm. At 12:30, the office cleared out for the lunch hour. The phone stopped ringing. The low hum of conversations died down as people headed to the break room or out to their cars. I gathered a stack of year-end tax forms and walked down the hallway to the third-floor copy room. The room was empty, smelling of warm paper and ozone. I approached the large shared printer in the corner, intending to run off 30 copies of the updated W-2 guidelines. As I reached to pull the paper tray open, my eyes caught sight of a single sheet of paper resting in the output bin. Someone had printed a document and forgotten to retrieve it. It was a common occurrence. People clicked print from their desks, got distracted by a phone call, and left their documents sitting there for hours. Normally, I would just slide the abandoned paper onto the counter and proceed with my own work, but the bold black font at the top of the page caught my attention. It was the standard header for the Hargrove Logistics internal email system. I reached out and picked up the paper. It was still slightly warm from the machine. The email was from Derek Brennan. The recipient was Trish Dolan. The timestamp was from earlier that morning at 9:14. I read the text once. I stopped breathing. I forced myself to inhale the chemical smell of the toner filling my lungs, and I read it again. The message was brief. Derek had written that once he was running things at the company, and he assured her to trust him because it was happening soon, his very first order of business would be making her the vice president of sales. He wrote that she had earned it. The final sentence consisted of 3 words. In every way, it was followed by a typed winking face emoticon. I stood perfectly still, the hum of the printer vibrating through the soles of my shoes. He had used his company email, the secure server owned and operated by Hargrove Logistics. He had used official corporate communication channels to promise a senior executive promotion to his subordinate, explicitly tying that promotion to their personal physical relationship. My vision narrowed until the only thing in the world was that single sheet of paper. The sheer stupidity of it was breathtaking. Derek was a man who believed his own lies so thoroughly that he forgot he was leaving a trail of breadcrumbs behind him. He thought he was untouchable. He thought the rules applied to the warehouse workers and the administrative staff, not to the golden boy of the sales department. I did not panic. I did not rip the paper into pieces. I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out my phone. I laid the email flat on the beige counter under the harsh fluorescent lights. I opened the camera application, made sure the focus was sharp on the timestamp and the sender details, and took 3 clear photographs. I picked the paper back up and placed it exactly where I had found it, right in the center of the output tray. If Derek or Trish came looking for it, they would find it undisturbed. They would never know anyone else had seen it. I walked back to my desk, my steps measured and calm. I opened the encrypted folder on my computer. I opened the spreadsheet that tracked the financial ruin of my marriage. I scrolled down past the Rosario's charges, past the cocktail bar tabs, past the boutique flower shop receipts. I created a new entry for week 15. I typed the date. I typed the location. In the evidence column, I wrote a single devastating sentence. Derek promises VP position to Trish via company email server, timestamped and discoverable. I uploaded the photographs from my phone directly into the secure cloud drive, linking them to the spreadsheet. I sat back in my chair and stared at the screen. The trap was no longer just a financial maneuver. Derek had handed me the exact mechanism for his professional termination. Firing him without cause would have been complicated, potentially triggering severance packages or legal challenges. Terminating him for cause, specifically for utilizing company resources to facilitate an inappropriate relationship and making unauthorized promises of corporate advancement, was ironclad. The company I now owned had a strict morality and conduct clause in the employee handbook. I knew exactly what it said because I was the one who had formatted the handbook 3 years ago. Derek was violating page 12, section 4. He was handing me the sword, pointing it at his own chest, and asking me to push. The dark satisfaction of the moment carried me through the rest of the afternoon. I felt powerful. I felt like a tactician moving pieces on a chessboard where my opponent did not even realize a game was being played. But the height of strategic dominance is a fragile thing, and it shattered completely later that same evening. It was Wednesday night. The house was quiet. Derek's car was not in the driveway. He had sent a brief text at 5 o'clock claiming there was a sudden crisis with a shipping manifest, and he would be staying late at the office to sort it out. I did not bother to check his location on the family phone plan. I knew he was not at the office. I knew exactly where he was, and it no longer mattered. At 9 o'clock, I walked upstairs to Lily's room. The hallway was shadowed, the only light coming from the crack under her door. I pushed the door open gently. The room smelled of Strawberry Kids shampoo and the cedar shavings from her hamster cage. The walls were painted a soft yellow covered in posters of the solar system and framed drawings of insects. A small ladybug nightlight cast a warm red glow across the floorboards. Lily was sitting up in bed, her knees pulled to her chest, surrounded by a fortress of pillows. A spiral-bound notebook rested on her lap. The cover was decorated with dozens of puffy sticker bugs she had collected over the summer. It was her bug journal, the place where she meticulously recorded facts about every crawling thing she could find in the backyard. I walked over and sat on the edge of the mattress. The springs creaked softly under my weight. She looked up, her blue eyes so much like my grandmother's, wide and serious. She turned the notebook toward me, pointing to a carefully drawn sketch of a large butterfly with vibrant orange wings. She told me she had learned a new fact about monarch butterflies. She said they fly 3,000 miles during their migration. She traced the age of the drawing with her small finger, explaining that they had never been to their destination before, but they just instinctively knew exactly where they needed to go. I reached out and smoothed a stray lock of hair behind her ear. Her forehead was warm. The innocent enthusiasm in her voice was a sharp contrast to the cold, calculating world I had been living in all day. I told her that was incredible. I told her nature had a way of building compasses inside of us. As she closed the journal, the pages flipped past my eyes. I caught a glimpse of handwriting that did not look like facts about caterpillars or beetles. The sentences were longer, written in the messy, hurried scrawl she used when she was trying to get her thoughts down quickly. I did not read the words. I respected her privacy too much to pry, assuming it was just the normal musings of an 11-year-old navigating middle school friendships. I would look back on that moment of willful ignorance later and wish I had paid closer attention. I tucked the heavy quilt around her shoulders, kissing the top of her head. The scent of her shampoo made my chest ache with a sudden fierce protectiveness. Everything I was doing, the trust, the acquisition, the spreadsheets, the silent endurance of Derek's betrayals, I was doing to ensure she would never have to worry about her future. I was building a fortress for her. I stood up and walked toward the doorway, my hand reaching for the light switch. "Mommy," her voice called out small and tentative in the dim room. I stopped. I turned back around. "Yeah, Bug." She pulled the edge of the quilt up to her chin. "Is Daddy coming home tonight?" The question hung in the air between us, heavy and thick. It was not the first time she had asked it. Over the past 5 months, as Derek's absences grew more frequent and his excuses more transparent, the question had become a regular feature of our nighttime routine. I looked at my daughter sitting alone in her bed, in a house that felt too large and too empty. I wanted to tell her the truth. I wanted to tell her that her father was a selfish, weak man who prioritized a cheap affair over reading her bedtime stories. I wanted to tell her that very soon he would not be coming home at all, and we would be better off without him. But she was 11. She still loved the version of her father she thought existed. She still remembered the man who used to carry her on his shoulders at the state fair and help her build baking soda volcanoes for the science fair. Ripping that image away from her abruptly and without warning felt like a cruelty I could not inflict. I relied on the script I had memorized, the script my own mother had used word for word 3 decades ago. I forced a gentle, reassuring smile onto my face. I kept my voice steady, hiding the tremor of rage that vibrated in my throat. "He will be home late, sweetie," I said. "Work stuff. You know how busy the warehouse gets at the end of the year." Lily looked at me. She did not nod. She did not smile back. She just stared at me with those ancient, perceptive eyes. "Okay," she said softly. There was a long, painful pause. The silence stretched out, filled only by the faint whir of the hamster wheel in the corner. Then she added, "You always say that." She rolled over, turning her back to me, pulling the quilt over her head. I stood in the doorway, my hand frozen on the light switch. I flipped the switch, plunging the room into the soft red shadows of the ladybug light, and pulled the door closed behind me. I leaned my back against the hallway wall, the plaster cooled through my sweater. I slid down slowly until I was sitting on the hardwood floor, my knees pulled up to my chest in an exact mirror of Lily's posture. The air in my lungs felt like broken glass. The dark satisfaction I had felt in the office, the thrill of holding the evidence of Derek's ruin in my hand, evaporated completely. This was the cost. It was not the money spent on hotel rooms. It was not the humiliation of the affair. It was not the stress of the secret corporate acquisition. The true cost was sitting on the other side of that door. An 11-year-old girl who was slowly agonizingly learning that the adults in her life could not be trusted. She was learning that her father's absence was a permanent fixture, and worse, she was learning that her mother would lie right to her face to cover it up. She was learning that work stuff was just a synonym for abandonment. I rested my forehead against my knees, closing my eyes against the dark hallway. I had spent 15 weeks meticulously auditing Derek's financial and professional life. I had accounted for every dollar, every text message, every stolen hour. I had built a watertight case that would leave him with nothing. But sitting on the floor outside my daughter's bedroom, I realized I had failed to audit the emotional wreckage happening right inside my own home. I was winning the war, but the collateral damage was the only thing I actually cared about. The anniversary party was exactly 4 weeks away. I needed to finish this. I needed to drop the hammer, end the marriage, and burn the facade to the ground before the rot spread any deeper into Lily's heart. I stood up, my legs stiff the cold, resolve returning to my spine. I walked down the stairs, leaving the quiet hallway behind. The traps were set. The evidence was secured. The company was mine. It was time to hire a lawyer who did not care about logistics or trusts. It was time to hire a lawyer who specialized in consequences. The final documents from DuPage County arrived on a Monday afternoon, exactly 18 weeks after I found that first restaurant charge. I sat across from Ray Schofield as he slid a thick bound folder across his desk. It contained the recorded deed and the articles of amendment. The Brandon Petrie Trust now held 62% of Hargrove Logistics. Wade retained the remaining 38% as the advisory chair, a passive role with no operational control. I was the sole trustee, holding full voting rights. I reached out and touched the heavy paper. My name was printed there in stark black ink. My trust, my company. I held the documents carefully, the way other people might hold a college diploma or a newborn, almost afraid the pages would dissolve if I gripped them too tightly. Schofield folded his hands on his desk and offered a small satisfied nod. He told me congratulations were in order, pointing out that I officially owned a freight company. I looked down at the embossed county seal. I owned my husband's employer. I corrected him, my voice completely flat. Schofield paused, a quiet understanding passing over his face. That too. I did not take the folder back to the house on Elm Street. Derek was not a malicious snooper, but he was a careless one. He would routinely tear through my bedside table, looking for a spare phone charger or rifle, through the office filing cabinet, searching for his passport the night before a trip. A fireproof lockbox under the bed would only invite his chaotic rummaging. Instead, I drove straight to the bank. I rented a safe deposit box under Lily's name, naming myself as the custodian. I placed the acquisition documents inside, right next to the letter from my grandmother. I closed the metal door, turned the key, and felt the heavy, satisfying clunk of the lock sliding into place. The cage was built. The door was shut. Derek was inside, and he still thought he was flying free. With the corporate takeover complete, the parallel track of my plan required a different kind of professional. Wade's personal lawyer had recommended a family law specialist in downtown Chicago. He had described her as a woman who did not do feelings, a practitioner who was terrifying in the absolute best way possible. That Thursday afternoon, I found myself sitting in the law offices of Petra Okafor. The contrast between Wade Hargrove's dusty wood-paneled office and Petra's space was jarring. Her office was entirely glass and polished steel, stripped of any personal clutter. There were no family photos on her desk. There was a single slightly dying potted plant in the corner and a framed law degree from Northwestern hanging on the stark white wall. The room smelled deliberately of nothing, lacking the vanilla candles or stale coffee that usually permeated professional spaces. Petra was tall, wearing a crisp silk blouse with her natural hair cropped close to her scalp. She had a habit of taking her reading glasses off and putting them back on like punctuation marks to her sentences. I sat with my hands folded tightly in my lap, my knuckles pale. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was the crossing point. The acquisition had been a business maneuver, a transaction of numbers and legal entities. Sitting in a family law office meant crossing the line into a personal reckoning. Petra clicked her pen. The sound was deliberate and rhythmic, like a metronome keeping time for bad decisions. So she began looking at the intake form. He doesn't know you own the company. No, I said. And you have been documenting the affair for how long exactly? 22 weeks. I answered, my voice steadying as I fell back into the comfort of data. I have a master spreadsheet. I have credit card statements showing the diversion of marital funds. I have location data from his phone on our shared family plan because he never bothered to turn off location sharing. I have photographs of them together at a restaurant on Halstead. I paused, taking a breath. And I have a printed email from his official company account promising his mistress a vice president promotion once he takes over. Petra took her glasses off. She placed them carefully on the glass desk. She stared at me for a long silent moment. The rhythmic clicking of her pen stopped. You are an accountant, she observed. Chief accountant, I replied. I can tell. She leaned back in her chair, stippling her fingers. She told me that most clients came into her office armed with vague suspicions and tearful stories. She pointed out that I had walked in with a fully executed forensic audit. I swallowed hard, the reality of the last 5 months suddenly pressing down on my chest. I want to know my options. Petra picked her glasses back up. Your options, Mrs. Brennan, are spectacular. She pulled a yellow legal pad toward her and began to outline the battlefield. Illinois was a no-fault state, she explained. but the clear evidence of the dissipation of marital assets meant the court would heavily consider his spending on the affair when dividing our property. Every expensive dinner, every hotel stay, every boutique floral arrangement would be deducted from his side of the ledger. She confirmed that the logistics company was entirely separate property through the Brennan Petrie Trust, legally shielding it from his reach. More importantly, his continued employment at my newly acquired company gave me overwhelming leverage in any settlement negotiations. And that email, Petra, added a sharp predatory smile, touching her lips, promising a senior promotion to a subordinate he is sleeping with using company resources. That is a termination for cause gift wrapped in a bow. No severance, no unemployment dispute. I looked down at my hands. I don't want to destroy him, I said quietly. I have a daughter. I just want to be free of him, and I want him to understand what he threw away. Petra leaned forward, her expression softening just a fraction, though her eyes remained entirely clinical. I do not destroy people, Mrs. Brennan. I simply clarify their situation. She tapped the legal pad with her pen. Your husband's situation is that he cheated on his wife. He spent your shared money on his mistress. He promised corporate promotions he had absolutely no legal authority to make. And he did all of this while his wife was quietly buying the company out from under him. Delivering those facts to a judge is not destruction. That is consequences. Hearing a stranger say it out loud hit me physically. It was the first time someone had reflected the sheer scale of my undertaking back to me. 22 weeks of silent dinners, of fake smiles, of washing dishes, while my marriage burned to the ground. Consequences. My grandmother would have liked Petra Okafor very much. Petra made a final note on her pad. I have one question. You mentioned an anniversary party next month. Why wait for a public event? Why not file the paperwork tomorrow morning and serve him at the office? I considered the question. The real answer was tangled in my own chest, a complicated knot of strategy, deep pain, and the undeniable need for him to feel the exact weight of his actions. Because he honored her in public, I explained the memory of his past speeches playing in my mind. Every company event he stands up and praises her. At our anniversary, he will stand in front of 80 people and toast our marriage, and then he will find a way to toast her. He always does. I want the truth to be revealed in the exact same room where the lie was applauded. Petra nodded slowly. She told me she rarely recommended theatrical timing in divorce proceedings, as it usually backfired. She paused, looking at my meticulously organized binder. But, in my case, she said she understood completely. She slid a retainer agreement across the glass desk. I picked up the pen and signed my name on the bottom line without reading the fine print. It was the first time in my entire adult life I had signed a legal document without reading every single word. Petra noticed. You didn't read that. I know, I said, handing the paper back to her. That is how much I trust you. She pushed the document back toward me. Do not trust me. Read the document. Trust the process. I took the paper, read the fee structure, and the representation clauses, and handed it back. Petra smiled a genuine, terrifying smile. We were officially working together. I returned to the Hargrove Logistics office the following Monday, my steps feeling lighter than they had in months. The legal framework was set. The trap was fully constructed. I only had to endure 3 more weeks until the anniversary party. At noon, I walked down the hall toward the employee break room to heat up a container of leftover soup. The corridor was quiet. As I approached the open doorway, I heard a voice. Trish Dolan was standing by the microwave, her back to the door, a cell phone pressed to her ear. I stopped instantly, my rubber soled flat, making no sound on the linoleum floor. I pressed my shoulder against the wall, perfectly hidden just around the corner. Trish's voice was completely different. When she spoke to Derek or to Wade or to anyone in the sales department, her tone was breathless and sweet-pitched a little higher to sound eager and accommodating. Now, speaking into her phone, her voice was flat, nasal, and entirely pragmatic. No, Mom, I am not in love, Trish said, letting out an annoyed sigh. I told you, it is a career move. He is going to be running this place soon. Wade is basically out the door. And when Derek takes over, I am getting the VP spot. I stood perfectly still. The cold from the floor seeped through my shoes. Trish shifted her weight, the microwave humming loudly in the background. No, his wife is a non-issue. She is a bookkeeper or something. She doesn't even know what is happening in her own marriage, let alone the corporate structure. She's totally clueless. A long pause followed as she listened to her mother. Trish rolled her eyes, a gesture I could picture perfectly, even without seeing it. Because I am 34, Mom, she snapped. I don't have time to wait for promotions the normal way. Do you have any idea what it is like being a woman in the logistics industry? You either sleep your way up the ladder or you wait 15 years for some old man to retire and hope they notice you. Derek is useful. That is all. He's a stepping stone. The microwave beeped. Trish opened the door, pulled out her lunch, and ended the call. Her heels clicked across the floor as she walked out the opposite door heading toward the sales wing. I stayed leaning against the wall for a long time. The smell of stale popcorn and reheated pasta hung heavily in the air. My chest did not tighten with rage. My hands did not shake. Instead, a profound hollow exhaustion washed over me. It was a bone-deep weariness that made my shoulders slump. She did not love him. She was not swept up in a passionate, uncontrollable romance that destroyed my family by accident. She was not even pretending to care about him. She was using my husband in the exact same cold, calculated way my husband thought he was using me. Derek believed Trish adored him. He believed his own charm had won over the bright, ambitious younger woman. Trish believed Derek had actual power, banking her entire career trajectory on a man who was nothing more than a middle manager. And neither of them knew the actual truth. There were 3 people caught in this miserable web. 3 distinct intersecting lies. And leaning against the wall by the break room, I realized I was the only person who could see the entire board. The betrayal of the affair was a familiar pain by now. But hearing Trish dismiss me so casually, reducing 15 years of my life and my entire professional existence to a clueless bookkeeper landed differently. It did not make me angry. It just made me incredibly tired. I walked into the break room, bypassed the microwave entirely, and threw my container of soup into the trash. I did not have an appetite anymore. I walked back to my desk and opened the calendar application on my computer. I counted the days left until the ballroom was booked. The caterer was paid. The jazz quartet was confirmed. The guest list was finalized. Everything was perfectly aligned. Derek thought he was winning a promotion and a new life. Trish thought she was manipulating her way to a vice president title. They were both marching confidently toward a finish line that did not exist. I closed the calendar and opened my accounting software. I had a company to run. It was the 21st week of my silence, and something in the air of our house finally shifted. The change did not come from me, it came from Derek. For months, I had been the perfect invisible manager of his life. I had washed his clothes, paid his credit card bills, and nodded politely at his fabricated excuses. But as the corporate acquisition demanded more of my time, and as my meetings with Petra Okafor and Ray Schofield increased, my presence at home became a shadow of what it used to be. I was calmer, far more distant, and completely unbothered by his schedule. For a man who was entirely accustomed to his wife orbiting his needs, the sudden absence of my gravity was alarming. It happened on a Sunday morning. The November rain was beating steadily against the kitchen windows, washing the last dead leaves from the oak trees in the front yard. I was sitting on the living room couch, reading a hardcover biography, wearing a thick wool sweater. Derek walked into the kitchen. I could hear his bare feet slapping against the cold tile floor. He poured a cup of coffee and walked to the edge of the living room, leaning against the doorframe. He stood there for a long time just watching me. I did not look up from my page. "You have been busy lately," he said, taking a slow sip from his mug. "Year-end planning," I replied, turning the page. "You know how Wade is about the fourth quarter numbers." He shifted his weight. "You seem different." I stopped reading. I marked my page closed, the book, and looked up. It was the first time I had made direct, sustained eye contact with him in weeks. Different how Derek frowned, his brow furrowing as he tried to articulate a feeling he did not fully understand. "I do not know. Just you are not around as much. You have all these financial meetings. You are always on your laptop. Are you around?" I asked. The question hung in the quiet room. The rhythmic sound of the rain against the glass seemed to get louder. Derek's jaw tightened visibly. A flash of defensiveness crossed his face. "What is that supposed to mean?" he asked, his voice dropping an octave. "Nothing," I said, my tone perfectly mild. I picked my book back up and opened it. "Just an observation, the same as yours." He stared at me for another 5 seconds, waiting for an argument that I refused to give him. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the room. A minute later, I heard the heavy thud of the garage door closing. I knew exactly what he was doing. He was pacing between his golf clubs and the lawnmower, holding his phone to his ear, calling Trish to complain that his wife was acting weird. He had noticed the shift, not because he cared about my emotional well-being, but because his comfort had been disrupted. He did not notice his wife leaving him. He only noticed that she had stopped serving him. The tension followed us into the next week. It was Wednesday afternoon, 3 weeks before the anniversary party, when the stakes suddenly accelerated. I was sitting at my desk at Hargrove Logistics, reconciling the monthly fuel expenses, when Frank Upton stopped by. The warehouse manager was holding a stack of shipping manifests, his usually cheerful face pulled into a tight frown. He leaned down, resting his forearms on the top of my cubicle partition, and lowered his voice. "Hey, Cole, can I ask you something kind of strange?" I minimized my spreadsheet. "Of course, Frank. What is it?" Frank glanced over his shoulder toward the hallway before looking back at me. "Trish Dolan was down in the warehouse this morning. She started asking me all these questions about the company ownership structure, like who owns what percentages, where the articles of organization are filed, that kind of stuff." A cold prickle of alarm ran down my spine. "She asked you about the corporate structure?" "Yeah," Frank said, scratching the back of his neck. "Weird, right?" I told her. "Wade owns everything, lock, stock, and barrel." She said she heard there might be some major changes coming down the pipeline. I figured she was just gossiping about the retirement rumors. "Probably," I said, keeping my breathing even. Frank leaned in a little closer. "But then she asked if you handled the human resources files, the employment agreements. Specifically, she wanted to know if you had access to Derek's contract." I went completely still. The hum of the computer tower under my desk was the only sound in my ears. Trish was digging. She was not just blindly trusting Derek's promises of a promotion. She was ambitious, she was practical, and she was trying to do her own due diligence before she hitched her entire career to his wagon. If she kept asking questions, if she started pulling public county records, she might accidentally stumble onto the Brennan Petrie Trust before the trap was ready to spring. "What did you tell her, Frank?" I asked, my voice remarkably calm. "I told her, yeah, you handle all the payroll and the contracts," he said. I asked her why she needed to know, and she just changed the subject. "Just thought it was a little bizarre." "It is," I agreed, offering him a small, tight smile. "No reason to worry about it, though." "Thank you for telling me." Frank nodded, tapped the partition, and walked away. I turned back to my monitor. My hands were shaking slightly. The timeline was compressing. The anniversary party was 21 days away. I needed every single lock secured before Trish Dolan found the key. But all of my careful planning, all of the legal maneuvering, and the controlled suppression of my own rage fell apart 2 nights later. It was Friday, a little past 10 o'clock at night. The house was silent. Derek's car was absent from the driveway, again an occurrence so routine. I no longer bothered to catalog the excuse he had texted me at 6 o'clock. I walked upstairs to check on Lily before going to bed. The November air was biting, and I wanted to make sure her window was closed tight. I pushed her door open. The room was bathed in the soft red glow of her ladybug nightlight. The glow in the dark plastic stars I had glued to her ceiling years ago shone faintly above her bed. She was fast asleep, her face pressed deep into her pillow, her soft brown hair fanned out across the sheets. It was the room of a child who still believed in magic and monarch butterflies. I walked quietly to the window, sliding the lock into place to block out the draft. As I turned back, I noticed her bug journal. It was lying open face down on her stomach, her hand resting loosely near the edge of the paper. She had fallen asleep writing. I smiled, a soft, genuine ache in my chest. I reached down gently, slipping the notebook from beneath her fingers, intending to set it on the small desk in the corner. As I lifted it, the heavy spiral binding caused the book to flip over, landing open in my hands. The page was illuminated by the red nightlight. I was about to close it when I saw the heading. It was not a drawing of a moth. It was not a list of facts about fireflies. It was written in her careful sixth-grade print, but the letters were pressed hard into the paper, messy and urgent. The title read, "Things I Know That Nobody Says." I stopped breathing. I stood completely frozen next to her bed, the weight of the spiral notebook suddenly unbearable in my hands. My eyes scanned down the page. Number 1. Mom cries at night. She thinks I am asleep. I hear her in the bathroom with the water running. The air rushed out of my lungs. I had been so careful. I had turned the faucet on high every single time. I had pressed a towel over my mouth. She had heard me. Number 2. Dad does not come home most nights. He says work stuff. It is not work stuff. Number 3. Mom and Dad do not talk at dinner. They talk to me but not to each other. My legs gave out. I sank slowly down, sitting on the very edge of the mattress. My hands gripped the edges of the notebook. I read the next line and the words blurred through a sudden hot rush of tears. Number 4. Dad called someone on the phone and said, "I miss you." He was not talking to Mom. She had heard him. 11 years old, playing in her room or walking down the hallway, and she had heard the man she loved speaking to another woman. Number 5. Monarch butterflies migrate alone. They do not need a flock. Maybe people can do that too. Number 6. I love Mom. I love Dad. I do not love them together. I slid off the mattress and sank to the floor. I pressed my back against the wooden bed frame, pulling my knees up to my chest, the journal resting in my lap. I read the list again. And again, line by line. Every single lie I had told myself over the last 22 weeks shattered into dust on the hardwood floor. I had built an entire architecture of justification for my silence. I had told myself I was staying in the house for her. I had told myself I was securing the corporate acquisition for her future. I had convinced myself that keeping the peace, maintaining the illusion of a functioning family until the financial trap was perfectly set, was an act of maternal protection. I was wrong. I was not protecting her from the truth. She already knew the truth. Kids do not miss things. They just file them differently, tucking the heartbreak between facts about insect migration and spelling homework. She did not want a secure trust fund. She did not want a majority stake in a logistics company. She wanted a mother who did not have to hide in the bathroom and muffle her sobs with a bath towel. The specific suffocating horror of realizing your own child has been watching you perform a lie and documenting every single crack in the foundation broke me completely. I had spent half a year auditing my husband. Lily had been auditing both of us. A memory rose unbeaten in my mind. I was 10 years old, standing in a kitchen that smelled of dish soap and quiet despair. I was watching my own mother wash plates while my father packed a suitcase in the other room. My mother had smiled at me, a brittle, awful smile, and told me everything was fine. I had sworn on the day Lily was born that I would never be that woman. I would never let my daughter inherit the legacy of silent endurance. And yet here I was. I was my mother. I was just washing fancier dishes while the house burned down around us. I carefully closed the buck journal. I stood up, my joints aching, and placed it on her desk exactly where she would find it in the morning. I looked back at her sleeping form. She did not stir. I walked out of her room, leaving the door cracked just enough to let the hallway light in. I walked into the master bathroom. I turned on the sink, letting the cold water rush over the porcelain basin. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. I saw the dark circles under my eyes, the tight, rigid set of my jaw, the armor I had worn for almost half a year. And then, for the first time in 22 weeks, I did not reach for a towel to muffle the sound. I gripped the edges of the sink, bowed my head, and I cried. I cried loudly, the deep-wrecked sobs of a woman who had finally realized that all the power in the world means absolutely nothing if it costs you the only thing you were trying to protect. The water kept running, but it did not matter anymore. The silence was broken. The morning after I broke down on the bathroom floor felt like moving through deep water. The sharp, precise energy that had carried me through the last 22 weeks was completely gone. I woke up, made a pot of coffee, and poured a cup I did not drink. I packed a lunch for Lily, carefully cutting the crust off her sandwich, performing the familiar motions of motherhood while my chest felt entirely hollow. I drove to the office and sat at my desk, but the numbers on my spreadsheets looked like a foreign language. The complex corporate acquisition, I had just orchestrated the legal documents, safely locked away the master file detailing every single lie my husband had told over the past 5 months. None of it mattered. I had secured a financial empire, and it tasted like ash in my mouth. I went through the motions for 3 days. Work, dinner, bedtime. I watched Derek walk through the kitchen checking his phone, offering his hollow excuses about warehouse delays, and I felt absolutely nothing. The engine of cold strategy that had driven me was dead. By Thursday night, the silence in my own head became deafening. It was 11 o'clock, the house was asleep. I sat on the carpet in the master bedroom, my back pressed against the heavy mahogany bed frame. I had arranged my body in the exact same posture Lily had taken when I found her writing in her journal. The symmetry was not lost on me. I pulled my phone from my pocket, the screen glowing harshly in the darkroom, and dialed a Chicago area code. Petra Okafor answered on the second ring. She did not say hello. "It is late." Her voice came through the speaker, crisp and awake. "Is there a legal emergency, Colette? I want to cancel," I said. My voice was barely a whisper, thin and frayed. There was a pause on the line. The rhythmic clicking of Petra's pen, a sound I had come to associate with her calculating mind, echoed softly. "Cancel the divorce filing. Cancel the public reveal. Cancel the anniversary party." I closed my eyes, resting my head back against the wood. I want to cancel the whole theatrical performance. I just want to file the paperwork quietly tomorrow morning. No speeches, no public moment, just an envelope handed to him at the office. Petra did not rush to answer. She was exceptionally good at waiting. "May I ask what changed your mind?" My throat tightened. I went into my daughter's bedroom to close a window. She had fallen asleep, writing in a notebook she uses to track insects in the backyard. She wrote a list of things she knows but nobody talks about. I swallowed hard, forcing the words out into the dark room. My daughter wrote that she hears me crying at night. She wrote that she knows her father is calling another woman. She is 11 years old, Petra, and she is carrying the weight of our entire broken marriage in a notebook. The silence from the other end of the line stretched out for a long time. I could hear the faint sound of city traffic through Petra's office window in Chicago. "I am doing this for revenge," I continued, the confession spilling out of me. I wrapped it up in the language of justice and corporate strategy, but it is just revenge, and my daughter is collateral damage either way. Humiliating him in front of 80 people is not going to fix what is broken in her. "How old did you say she was?" Petra asked carefully. 11. "And you want to cancel the public reveal because you believe it will protect her." It was not a question. It was a statement laid out for inspection. "Because she is already collateral damage," I said. "Is she collateral damage from the reveal?" Petra asked, her tone dropping its usual clinical detachment for something far more direct. "Or is she collateral damage from the marriage?" I opened my eyes and stared at the shadows on the ceiling. I did not have an answer. Petra waited, allowing the weight of her question to settle into the space between us. "Both of those things cause pain, Colette. But they are very different kinds of pain. The pain of the marriage is a slow, quiet poison that teaches a young girl to accept betrayal as a normal condition of a household. The pain of the reveal is the sharp, sudden pain of a surgical cut." My hand gripped the phone tighter. "A surgical cut? The question is not whether to act," Petra said, her voice anchoring me to the floor. "The question is how to act in a way that your daughter eventually sees her mother standing up instead of watching her fall apart in the shadows. If you walk away quietly, he controls the narrative. He tells everyone, including your child, that you gave up. If you speak the truth out loud, where everyone can hear it, you own the story." She did not wait for me to agree. She simply told me she would keep the filing prepared for the Monday following the party exactly as we had planned, and she disconnected the call. I sat in the dark for another hour. Petra's words echoed in my ears, fighting against the crushing guilt I felt every time I pictured Lily's handwriting. I needed something stronger than legal advice. I needed a compass. Saturday morning arrived with the bitter biting cold that frosted the edges of the living room windows. I woke up early before Derek or Lily had stirred and drove my car out to the bank in downtown Naperville. The bank was mostly empty. The air smelled of floor wax and old circulated currency. I signed the excess lock and followed the attendant into the vault, my footsteps echoing off the thick concrete walls. I pulled the long metal safe deposit box from its slot and carried it into one of the small windowless private viewing rooms. I sat at the tiny laminate table and opened the lid. The corporate acquisition documents rested in a neat stack on the left side. I ignored them entirely. I reached for the plain white envelope resting on the right side. My fingers traced the edge of the paper as I pulled Nana Margot's letter out into the harsh fluorescent light. I unfolded the brittle page. I had read it the day I inherited the trust, and I had read it the day I bought the company, but I needed to read it again today. Don't you dare stay for the wrong reasons. I did for 18 years. Your mother did for 26. Don't you be the third Patry woman to love a man more than she loves herself. 3 Patry women. The history of my family was written in the quiet endurance of bad marriages. Nana Margot had stayed for 18 years with a man who drank away his paycheck and forgot her name on her birthdays. But she eventually found the courage to pack a single cardboard suitcase and walk out the front door, spending the next 30 years of her life building a fierce, joyful existence. She had a spare room that smelled of lavender, she made a terrifyingly good lasagna, and she had a deep, unshakable peace. My mother Helen had stayed for 26 years. She washed the dishes while my father packed his bags to leave for a business trip that turned out to be a second family in Ohio. She had arranged the throw pillows on the sofa and pretended everything was fine until the day he died. She never found her peace. She just withered away, preserving the illusion of a family at the cost of her own soul. I had stayed for 15. I had balanced the checkbook planned, the family vacations, and silently tracked the credit card charges from a restaurant on Holstead Street. I had been following my mother's path for a decade and a half, utterly convinced I was doing the right thing for my child. My eyes drifted back to the memory of Lily's journal. Monarch butterflies migrate alone. They do not need a flock. Nana Margot had been a monarch. She had remembered she had wings at 48 years old. My mother had never remembered at all. I was 44, sitting in a bank vault, holding a fortune in corporate assets and a mountain of legal evidence, and I was still acting like a caterpillar trapped on a dying leaf. I carefully folded the letter and slipped it back into the envelope. I placed it in the metal box, closed the lid, and locked it. The heavy metallic click echoed in the small room. I walked out of the bank and stood on the sidewalk. The freezing air hit my face sharp and clear. Something profound had shifted inside my chest. It was not a plan yet, but it was a definitive direction. The Patry women were monarchs. It was time to remember how to fly. The house was completely silent when I returned that Saturday night. Derek had left a note on the kitchen counter, claiming he was meeting Frank to review inventory logs. I threw the note in the trash without a second thought. I walked upstairs and paused in the hallway outside Lily's bedroom. Her door was open. The soft yellow light from her desk lamp spilled out onto the hardwood floor. I stood in the doorway and watched her. She was sitting at her small desk, her head bent in intense concentration. She held a pale green-colored pencil, carefully shading the wings of a Luna moth she had drawn on a thick piece of sketch paper. The intricate details of the antennae and the delicate trailing tails of the wings were beautiful. The bug journal was closed and resting on the top shelf of her bookcase. I watched the steady movement of her hand, the quiet focus in her posture. This child, this incredibly observant, brilliant girl had been watching her parents destroy each other in slow motion, documenting our failures between facts about the natural world. I took a step into the room. My hand rested lightly on the doorframe. "Hey, Bug," I said softly. Lily did not look up, keeping her focus on the delicate shading of the wing. "Hey, Mom." The scratching of the pencil against the paper was a steady, rhythmic sound. I walked over and sat on the edge of her bed. The mattress dipped slightly. I took a slow, deep breath, pulling the scent of her strawberry shampoo into my lungs. "Can I ask you something?" I asked, keeping my voice gentle. Yeah, she replied, swapping the green pencil for a darker shade of forest green to outline the edge of the wing. I watched her work for a moment, gathering my courage. If I made a big change, a really big permanent change that meant things were going to be very different around here, would you be scared? Her hand stopped moving. The pencil hovered over the paper. She slowly turned her head and looked at me. Her eyes, that specific shade of gray blue she had inherited from Nana Margot, searched my face. Different how she asked. Her voice was guarded, cautious. Like just you and me, I said, holding her gaze steadily. Not that. Not this house, maybe. Something entirely new. Lily turned back to her desk and placed the colored pencil down, lining it up perfectly parallel with the edge of the paper. The silence in the room stretched out heavy and expectant. Mom, she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. Yeah. She looked down at her hands. I wrote something in my journal a few days ago, about you and Dad. My chest tightened so painfully, I had to remind myself to breathe. I know, Bug, I admitted softly. I saw it. The book was open on your bed when I came in to close your window. I read the page. Her eyes widened, a sudden panic flashing across her face. You read it. I did not mean to pry, but I saw the list, and I could not look away. I am so sorry for invading your privacy. Lily picked at the edge of her thumbnail, her shoulders rising toward her ears. Are you mad at me? The question broke my heart all over again. I reached out and gently took her hand, pulling her slightly toward the bed. No, sweetie, I am not mad at all. I am incredibly grateful. You saw things I was trying so hard to hide from you, and you were brave enough to write them down exactly as they were. She looked up at me, a single tear pooling in the corner of her eye. Number 6 was the hardest one to write. I love Mom. I love Dad. I do not love them together. I know it was, I whispered, squeezing her fingers. The room fell quiet again. Outside, the wind rattled the window pane. Lily took a deep breath, her small chest expanding, and she looked directly into my eyes with a fierce, sudden clarity. Mom, she said again. Yeah, Buck, I do not want you to cry in the bathroom anymore. The absolute simplicity of her request stripped away every complication, every corporate strategy, every ounce of anger I had been carrying. I reached out both arms, and she climbed out of her chair and crawled onto the bed. She buried her face against my chest, wrapping her arms around my waist, holding on the exact same way she used to when she was 4 years old and terrified of thunderstorms. I rested my chin on the top of her head, closing my eyes, holding her as tightly as I could. I won't, sweetie. I promise you. I am never doing that again. We sat there for a long time, the warmth of her small body grounding me to the present moment. The anger that had fueled me for months dissolved completely, leaving behind a cold, brilliant light. Lily shifted slightly against my sweater, and Mom, yeah, she pulled back just enough to look at my face. Monarch butterflies do not fly alone because they are sad. They fly alone because they are strong enough to make the journey. I looked at my remarkable daughter, realizing she had just handed me the exact piece of armor I had been missing. I had been planning the anniversary party as an act of pure vengeance. I wanted to humiliate Derek. I wanted to watch Trish Dolan's face fall when she realized her promotion was a phantom. I wanted to burn their reputations to ash in front of 80 of their colleagues. But holding my daughter in the quiet glow of her bedroom, the entire purpose of the night shifted on its axis. 3 Petrie women, 3 butterflies who had forgotten they could fly. Nana had remembered at 48. My mother had never remembered it all. I was remembering right now at 44. And Lily would never need to remember because she already knew. I was not going to cancel the anniversary party. I was going to keep the ballroom, the caterer, and the jazz quartet. But the objective had fundamentally changed. It was no longer about revenge. It was no longer about a strategic corporate takeover. It was about something infinitely simpler and far more devastating. It was about the truth. I did not want to stand in front of that room to destroy my husband. I wanted to stand in front of that room to resign from my marriage. I wanted to speak the truth cleanly and factually, not out of anger, but so my daughter would eventually understand that her mother walked into a room full of people who were applauding a lie and refused to clap along. I was going to deliver the facts undeniable and precise, the way an accountant does it, the way a Petri woman does it. I tucked Lily into bed, pulling the thick quilt up over her shoulders. I kissed her forehead, turned on the ladybug nightlight, and walked out into the hallway. I went downstairs to the dark kitchen. I did not turn on the overhead lights. I sat down at the cold granite island and opened my laptop. I opened a new blank document. I typed the title at the top of the page. Anniversary, Remarks Colette R. Brennan. I sat in the glow of the screen and I began to write. I did not write a revenge speech. I did not use adjectives or emotional appeals. I wrote a ledger. I documented the history of a failure, itemizing the costs, and identifying the exact moment the accounts went bankrupt. I wrote a resignation letter from a life that no longer belonged to me. I finished writing at 2 o'clock in the morning. I read the document once, top to bottom. Every word was true. Every sentence was earned. I closed the laptop. The screen went dark, plunging the kitchen back into shadows. I walked upstairs, got into bed, and closed my eyes. And for the first time in 22 weeks, I slept straight through the night, completely free of dreams. Saturday morning arrived, with a pale washed-out sky that threatened snow. I moved through the early hours with the quiet, practiced precision of a woman preparing to dismantle her own life. I packed a small overnight bag for Lily, carefully folding her favorite pajamas and making sure her buck journal was tucked safely inside. I drove her to the older section of town where the houses sat far back from the street behind massive ancient oak trees. Helen lived in a sprawling colonial revival house that always smelled of cinnamon and old paper. She was 76 years old, my grandmother, Margot's dearest friend, and the only person I trusted to keep my daughter completely insulated from the fallout of the evening. Helen met us at the front door. She wore a thick wool cardigan and a soft, knowing expression. I did not want Lily anywhere near the ballroom tonight. The event was entirely for adults, and the reckoning that was about to take place was not something a child ever needed to witness. Lily hugged my waist tightly before running inside to look at Helen's collection of antique glass birds. I lingered on the porch for a moment. Helen reached out and rested her warm papery hand over mine. She told me my grandmother would be incredibly proud of me today. I nodded, unable to speak around the sudden lump in my throat, and walked back to my car. The afternoon stretched out long and silent. I returned to the house on Elm Street to prepare. I stood in front of the master bathroom mirror, moving through the motions of getting ready with a strange detached calm. I chose a navy blue dress. It was not flashy. It was not covered in sequins, and it did not have a dramatic neckline. It was tailored, structured, and entirely professional. I clasped my grandmother's pearl earrings into place. I fastened my silver Seiko watch around my left wrist. I had worn that exact watch every single day since I was 22 years old. Then, I did something I had not done for a formal event in over a decade. I left my hair down. I did not pull it back into the severe practical twist I usually wore to corporate functions. I let it fall in soft waves over my shoulders. Derek walked into the bedroom just as I was finishing my makeup. The heavy, familiar scent of his Hugo Boss cologne filled the space between us immediately. He was adjusting his cufflinks, admiring his own reflection in the full-length mirror on the closet door. He paused, looking at my reflection in the glass. His eyes moved over my shoulders. He remarked that I looked different. I met his gaze in the mirror. I told him thank you, keeping my voice perfectly level. He clarified that he meant my hair. He pointed out that I never wore it down anymore. I picked up my clutch purse from the vanity counter. I told him it was a special occasion. Derek adjusted his collar, a smug, satisfied smile settling onto his face. He agreed, noting that 15 years was a massive milestone. He asked me if I could actually believe it had been that long. I turned around and looked directly at the man I had spent a decade and a half serving. I looked at the tailor suit paid for by my careful budgeting, the confident posture built on a foundation of my silent labor, and the absolute staggering blindness in his eyes. I told him no, I really could not believe it. We drove to the venue in separate cars, an arrangement he had suggested, so he could arrive early and network with the regional managers. I followed him 30 minutes later, pulling into the parking lot of the Naperville Grand Ballroom just as the sun dipped below the horizon, plunging the world into a freezing starless night. The ballroom was exactly as I had arranged it. Strings of warm fairy lights were draped across the high vaulted ceiling. Crisp white tablecloths draped over round tables. Silverware clinked against fine porcelain. A jazz quartet played softly in the far corner, providing an elegant backdrop to the rising hum of conversation. 83 guests stood in small clusters, holding champagne flutes and wearing cocktail attire, laughing and celebrating a milestone that did not actually exist. I took my seat at the head table. I placed my clutch on the chair next to me. I picked up a flute of champagne, but I did not drink from it. I simply held it, letting the chilled glass cool my skin. At 8:15, the jazz quartet brought their song to a quiet close. The murmur of the room began to fade. The clinking of a knife against the glass started near the front and rippled outward. The sound spread in waves, silencing the remaining chatter until the ballroom was completely quiet. I watched my husband step up to the microphone stand at the center of the room. He was entirely in his element. He unbuttoned his suit jacket, offering the crowd that easy practice charm that had won over so many clients and ruined so many of my Tuesday nights. He tapped the microphone. The soft thumb echoed through the speakers. He began exactly as I knew he would. He smiled broadly and announced that 15 years ago he had married the most organized woman in the entire state of Illinois. A wave of polite laughter washed over the crowd. I sat perfectly still, my back straight against the chair. Organized? He had reduced a decade and a half of devotion, sacrifice, and partnership to a clerical skill. I was a filing system to him, a mechanism to keep his life running smoothly while he pursued whatever actually mattered to him. He let the laughter die down before continuing. He lowered his voice, shifting into a tone of deep performed sincerity. He told the room that tonight he wanted to raise a glass to someone incredibly special. My fingers tightened around the stem of my champagne flute. The moment was here. I had waited 22 weeks for this exact sequence of words. Derek did not look at me. He turned his body toward table 6 located just to the right of the stage. He raised his glass and dedicated his toast to Trish Dolan. He called her the best regional sales manager the company had ever seen. He told 83 people that she was the person who made every single Monday morning worth showing up for. The applause was thunderous. People stood up from their chairs. I watched Trish Dolan press her hand against the neckline of her wrap dress, her eyes wide in a perfect theatrical display of shock. She mouthed the words, "Oh, stop," but her smile was triumphant. I sat at the head table and I simply watched them. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind 200 times. I had imagined feeling a blind white-hot rage. I had pictured myself throwing my glass, screaming, tearing the room apart. But sitting there, bathed in the warm fairy lights, listening to an entire room applaud the woman sleeping with my husband, I felt absolutely no anger at all. I felt pity. I looked at Derek glowing in the center of the room, oblivious to the trap closing around his ankles. I looked at Trish basking in a hollow victory, banking her entire future on a man who had absolutely nothing left to offer her. They were both so profoundly pathetic. Derek walked back to the head table as the applause finally began to fade. His face was flushed with pride. He sat down heavily in the chair next to mine, leaning over slightly to ask me if the toast had sounded good. I turned my head and looked at him. I told him it was very honest for once. Derek frowned, his thick eyebrows pulling together in confusion. He asked me what I meant by that. I did not answer him. I simply set my untouched champagne flute down on the white tablecloth. I pushed my chair back, the wooden legs scraping loudly against the floorboards. I stood up. I walked over to the center of the room and took the microphone from the stand. The room, which had been settling back into low conversation, suddenly went dead silent. This was not on the program. Derek had not planned for his wife to speak. Nobody ever planned for the quiet bookkeeper to take up space. I looked out over the sea of faces. I saw Frank Upton holding a dinner roll halfway to his mouth. I saw Wade Hargrove sitting near the back, his arms crossed over his chest, a knowing glint in his sharp eyes. And I saw Trish Dolan, her triumphant smile faltering just slightly as she realized the script had changed. I gripped the cold metal of the microphone. I did not shout. I did not let my voice shake. I spoke with the calm, measured authority of a woman reading a final balance sheet. I thanked Derek for his words. I told the room that his toast had been incredibly revealing. A few uncertain chuckles broke the silence. I waited for them to fade completely before I continued. I told the guests that 15 years was a very long time to pay attention to someone. I reminded them that I was an accountant and paying attention to the fine print was exactly what I did for a living. Derek shifted in his seat behind me. The fabric of his suit rustled loudly in the quiet room. I announced that I wanted to talk about numbers tonight. I explained that numbers do not lie even when the people attached to them do. I held up one finger. I said the first number was $47,836. I let the exact amount hang in the air for a full 3 seconds. Then I explained that was the precise amount of money my husband had spent on romantic dinners, boutique hotels, and expensive floral arrangements for a woman who was not his wife over the past 10 months. I added that every single cent was thoroughly documented on our shared credit card statements. The silence in the ballroom became absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating quiet. I heard a sharp intake of breath from someone near the front. Derek's face drained of all color, turning a sickly ashen gray. He gripped the edge of the tablecloth so hard his knuckles turned white. I held up a second finger. I said the second number was 62%. I looked directly at Frank Upton, then swept my gaze across the tables filled with warehouse managers, dispatchers, and sales representatives. I explained that I had acquired the controlling interest 6 weeks ago through a private family trust. I welcomed everyone to the new fiscal year, officially introducing myself as their new majority stakeholder. A collective stunned gasp rippled across the room. Several people physically dropped their forks onto their plates. Wade Hargrove offered a single slow nod from the back table. Derek looked like he had been struck by lightning. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. I held up a third finger. I said the third number was 1. I turned my gaze squarely onto table 6. I looked directly into Trish Dolan's eyes. I told the room that 1 was the exact number of emails my husband had sent from his official secure corporate email account, promising a vice president position to the very woman he had just toasted. I explained that using corporate resources to reward a personal physical relationship was a massive liability. I stated clearly and without any emotion that it was a termination for cause event. Trish's mouth fell open. The triumphant smile vanished, entirely replaced by a mask of sheer, unadulterated panic. She looked at Derek, but Derek was staring at the floor, breathing heavily, completely paralyzed. I lowered my hand. I gripped the microphone with both hands, grounding myself for the final entry on the ledger. This was not a number I cared about for the sake of the business. This was the only number that actually mattered. I told the room my final number was 11. I let my voice soften just a fraction. I explained that 11 was the age of our daughter. I told 83 strangers that my 11-year-old child had written a list in her journal. I told them she had written that she hears her mother crying in the bathroom at night, and she had written that she no longer loved her parents together. Tears pooled in the eyes of several women sitting near the front. The sheer devastating reality of that final number stripped away any lingering sense of corporate drama. It laid bare the absolute human cost of Derek's choices. I looked back at my husband. He was shaking, a fine, pathetic tremor vibrating through his shoulders. I told the room that the final number was not something I had found in a spreadsheet. I told them it was the number that changed absolutely everything. I placed the microphone back into the stand. The soft click echoed loudly. I picked up my champagne flute from the table. I looked at Derek, raised the glass 1 millimeter, and took the very first sip of the night. I told him, "Happy anniversary." I turned my back on him. I did not run. I did not hurry. I walked down the center aisle of the ballroom, my head held high. The only sound in the massive space was the sharp, rhythmic clicking of my heels against the polished hardwood floor. I reached the heavy oak doors at the back of the room. Just as my hand touched the brass handle, Derek's voice finally broke through the silence. He shouted my name, his voice cracking with desperation. He scrambled out of his chair, knocking his water glass over in the process. He yelled that I could not do this. He yelled that this was insane. I stopped. I turned around slowly, my hand still resting on the brass handle. I looked at the man I had spent 15 years loving, managing, and finally auditing. I told him I could do this. I reminded him that I owned the building, I owned the company, I owned every single legal document that proved exactly what he had done. I informed him that tomorrow morning, every employee in the room would receive an email from the new majority stakeholder outlining immediate leadership changes. I suggested he use his remaining time to update his resume. I pushed the heavy doors open and walked out into the cold November night. The parking lot was freezing. The wind whipped across the black asphalt, biting at my bare neck. My breath plumed in the air in front of me as I walked to my car. Behind me, the large glowing windows of the ballroom cast long shadows across the pavement. I could see the silhouettes of people standing up, clustered together, phones already pulled out. Derek was standing near the head table, gesturing wildly, completely out of control. Trish was nowhere to be seen. She had likely bolted for the side exit the second I mentioned the email. I unlocked my car and slid into the driver's seat. I closed the door, sealing myself inside the quiet insulated cabin. I did not start the engine immediately. I simply placed my hands on the cold leather of the steering wheel and took a deep, shuddering breath. My phone resting in the center console began to vibrate. The screen lit up the dark car. It buzzed once, twice, 7 times in rapid succession. I looked down at the notifications. There were 7 missed calls from Derek. 3 text messages followed immediately. He demanded I call him back. He called my actions insane. He typed in all capital letters that he was my husband. There was 1 missed call from Trish Dolan. There was a text message from Frank Upton that consisted entirely of the words "holy crap," repeated twice. There was a brief message from Wade Hargrove. He wrote that he was sitting at home, having just received a frantic phone call from someone at the party. The message ended by telling me he was incredibly proud of me. I ignored all of them. I opened my keypad and dialed a Chicago area code. Petra answered on the first ring. The sound of her clicking pen was absent. She simply asked how the evening had concluded. I leaned my head back against the headrest, staring up at the fabric of the car ceiling. I told her I had used numbers. I could hear the smile in Petra's voice when she replied. She called me her girl. She confirmed that we were proceeding with the divorce filing on Monday morning at 8 o'clock sharp. I confirmed the time. I thanked her. Before she hung up, Petra paused. She asked me, with genuine curiosity, how I felt in this exact moment. I turned my head and looked out the passenger window toward the glowing ballroom. I watched the frantic, panicked movements of the man who had thought he held all the cards. I thought about the millions of dollars in corporate assets, the meticulous spreadsheets, the legal traps, and the total destruction of a 15-year lie. I told Petra I felt exactly like my grandmother. Petra told me she would take that as the highest compliment, and the line disconnected. I made 1 more phone call, the only call that actually mattered. Helen answered after 3 rings. Her voice was thick with sleep but completely calm. She told me Lily had gone to sleep an hour ago. She added that right before she closed her eyes, Lily had asked if her mother was going to be okay. A fresh clean tear slipped down my cheek, warm against the freezing air of the car. I asked Helen to give Lily a message when she woke up in the morning. I asked her to tell my daughter that the Monarchs flew tonight. Helen paused for a moment. She admitted she had absolutely no idea what that meant, but she promised to deliver the message word for word. I thanked her, my voice thick with gratitude, and ended the call. I sat in the silence of the car. I thought about the $47,000 Derek had spent on his affair. I thought about the $780,000 Nana Margot had left me. I thought about the $1.2 million I had spent to acquire the company. I thought about the $15,000 retainer I had paid Petra Okafor. It was a staggering amount of money, and yet I had spent $0 on revenge. Everything I had done over the last 22 weeks was simply math. Numbers do not lie. Numbers do not cheat. Numbers do not use secure company servers to promise senior executive positions to women they are sleeping with. But my daughter's journal was not made of numbers, it was made of words. 6 sentences written by an 11-year-old girl in the middle of the night mattered more than every single cell in my master's spreadsheet. I did not execute this audit for revenge. I did not even do it for justice. I did it so my daughter would never have to write a 7th entry stating that her mother stayed. I reached out and started the engine. The heater roared to life, blasting warm air into the freezing cabin. I shifted the car into drive and pulled out of the parking lot, leaving the Naperville Grand Ballroom and the wreckage of my marriage far behind me. I drove through the dark, quiet streets of the suburbs. I stopped at a red light intersection. The town was completely asleep. While I waited for the light to change, I reached over with my right hand and unclasped the silver Seiko watch from my left wrist. I had worn it every day for 22 years. I had bought it with my very first paycheck out of college, telling myself that time was the only currency nobody could ever steal from you. I dropped the heavy silver watch into the cup holder. It landed with a dull clink. Tomorrow morning, when I picked Lily up from Helen's house, she was going to give me a friendship bracelet. I knew she had been making it in secret for 3 days. It was a simple braided cord covered in plastic beads that spelled out the word Mom. I was going to wear that plastic bracelet on the bare patch of skin where the Seiko used to live. Time is the only thing nobody can take from you, but sometimes you have to find the courage to give it back to yourself. The traffic light turned green. I pressed the accelerator and drove forward. Monday morning arrived with brilliant, blinding sunlight that bounced off the frost-covered lawns. I did not go to the Hargrove Logistics office. I sat at Helen's small circular kitchen table, holding a warm mug of coffee. At 8 o'clock sharp, I opened my laptop and drafted a company-wide email. The sender was Colette R., Brennan Majority Stakeholder, Brennan Petrie Trust. The subject line read, Leadership Transition, Effective Immediately. The email was brief and entirely professional. I outlined the successful transfer of Wade Hargrove's majority stake to the trust. I announced my assumption of total operational control. I clearly stated that Derek Brennan had been terminated for cause, citing the dissipation of company resources for personal benefit, referencing the time-stamped evidence secured on the corporate server. I concluded by stating that any unauthorized promises of advancement specifically regarding the Vice President of Sales position were officially voided. I hit send. I closed the laptop. My phone began to ring almost immediately. I answered exactly 3 calls that morning. I answered Petra, who confirmed the divorce petition had been successfully filed with the county clerk. I answered Ray Schofield, who confirmed the trust assets were fully secured. And I answered Wade Hargrove, who laughed loudly into the receiver and told me to give them hell. Derek called 23 times before noon. Every single call went straight to my voicemail. I knew I would have to listen to them eventually for the sake of the legal proceedings, but I did not have to listen to them today. Lily walked into the kitchen, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. She was wearing her favorite oversized sweater. She sat down at the table across from me and poured a bowl of cereal. The rhythmic crunch of her spoon was the most wonderful sound in the world. She stopped chewing for a moment and looked at me. She studied my face carefully. She told me I looked different. I smiled, letting the warmth reach all the way to my eyes. I asked her if it was a good different. She considered the question, tilting her head to the side. She decided it was a happy different. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. I told her it was definitely a happy different. She smiled back, released my hand, and opened her bug journal next to her cereal bowl. She picked up a blue pen and began to write a new entry on the fresh page. I leaned over slightly, reading the words as she wrote them. She wrote about the lunar moth. She noted that its entire lifespan was only 1 week. She documented the fact that the moth does not have a mouth and cannot eat. She wrote that it exists for a few short days entirely to be beautiful and to fly. Her final sentence was written in firm, clear letters. 1 week is enough if you use it right. I did not say a word. I simply reached out and rested my hand gently on the top of her head. The plastic beads of the friendship bracelet rattled softly against my bare wrist. The master spreadsheet was permanently closed. The numbers were perfectly balanced. The audit was finally over. We sat together at a kitchen table that did not belong to us, yet bathed in the bright morning light, eating cereal and reading about moths. There was no heavy cologne in the air. There were no fabricated stories about warehouse delays. There was no running water in the bathroom to mask the sound of a breaking heart. There were just two petri women sitting in the quiet morning finally learning how to fly. You might spend years trying to balance the ledger of a broken relationship, keeping track of every single lie and betrayal. But this story teaches us that true power does not come from destroying the person who hurt you. It comes from having the courage to finally walk away. Staying in a miserable marriage for the sake of the children often teaches them the exact wrong lesson about love and self-respect. Sometimes, the most profound act of protection you can offer your family is choosing your own peace over a hollow performance. You cannot audit someone into being faithful, and the energy you spend trying to control the uncontrollable is time you will never get back. Break the generational cycle. Have you ever stayed in a damaging situation far longer than you should have because you thought you were protecting someone else? Share your story in the comments below, and let's remind each other that it is never too late to start over.